Welcome to another episode of Calgary in Depth. I'm here at the Sweetgrass Deli and Eatery in Okotoks with Jared Tailfeathers. Thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Can you tell me a little bit? I know you live in Okotoks now, but how
Actually, I live in High River.
Oh, I'm sorry. We're meeting in Okotoks.
Yeah.
We usually meet in High River, where you live. Right. I'm a little thrown off by that we're not meeting in our usual place, which is the coffee shop in High River. So you live in High River, but you did live in Calgary in the past. Can you talk a little bit about your connection to Calgary, how long you lived there, and how long you've been in High River?
Sure. I was raised there. I was born in the States. I was born in North Dakota. My dad was going to medical school and decided he wanted a couple of American-born kids. And then when I was probably about a year old, just before a year old, we moved up to Edmonton, and we went to U of A. And then he passed in a car accident when I was about 14 months old. And then my mom had sisters in Calgary, so I had cousins, and two different families with cousins that were like exactly the same age as me. So there was a lot of good family connection. And so we moved to Calgary, and I moved to the Northwest, Silver Springs area. And then my mom got remarried to a man whose spouse had also passed away, and he had 4 kids. And so I moved to the Southwest. And then I pretty much lived in Calgary up until about 3 years ago, minus a couple of years that I was living in Vegas for a couple of years. Besides that, most of my time has been in Calgary. And then in 2018 to 2019, I kept on leaving town because I was doing research projects to go out to a whole bunch of different places, and also really important places within Calgary for Blackfoot people and traditional art and evidence on the land. And so I just kept on leaving town almost every day, and then every weekend at least. And so my wife and I decided that maybe we should just permanently leave Calgary. So we moved to High River about 3 years ago. We love it. It's sort of cycling out older people with the younger families, affordable spot to live. So we love it there. And I still work for Calgary Arts Development, which does a lot of grants, and for the past couple of years has been the main facilitator of public art in Calgary. So I am a public art lead. I have 2 main projects: the Blackfoot Confederacy Public Art Project, which is about to be publicized because we're going to be doing some in-community engagements to find out what the community members want to have. And that involves some of the location research, which is really good. I already had a lot of that under my belt within Calgary. And then I am a practicing artist beyond that, and most of my time is spent in Calgary, or I spend half my time working from my house. I mostly work out of Calgary still.
And I want to talk to you definitely more about your current work and your current projects. But first, can we back up a bit? So,
Sure.
Tell me again, so what age were you when you went to Calgary?
I was about 2.
Oh, about 2. So you started grade 1 there, right? So your whole schooling was there. When did you start to really dig deeper and learn more about Calgary and Alberta in terms of the Aboriginal heritage and history there?
Well, I mean, my dad is from the Blood Reserve, so all of his family, all my extended family, still lives there. So, I mean, I saw them all the time. And so I have a pretty good connection from when I was a kid. I heard Blackfoot when I was a kid all the way up to now. I wasn't really fluent in it. I certainly caught words that I remembered. And, as like a connection point of view, because I didn't live down there, I didn't really have that much connection. When I grew up in Calgary, it was, public school, so the curriculum was very settler-based. It was very, from the point of view of Canada, 1867, that's when everything started. And then very, little about Indigenous history, local history, and things like that. So I didn't really have that much of experience in Calgary about that, except for that I knew that this was part of my traditional territory, and that was pretty much it.
Yeah.
So I didn't know the language. I wasn't really get to participate in the ceremony, except for maybe the Sundance, a couple powwows every couple of years, every year or two. I was quite disconnected from that for most of my life.
On that topic, I want to ask you, in school, when Aboriginal subjects were discussed, was it general knowledge among your classmates that your father was Aboriginal? that you had this heritage, and did they sometimes mention that? Did the teacher say, "Oh, when we have Jared here, who happened, his father"?
Yes,
they would say that.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
We would call that a token Indian.
Oh, I see. Because you were usually the only one in the class.
Yeah. There's every couple of years there was one.
Okay.
One.
Yeah.
For the most part, yeah, it was me and my brothers and sisters were the only ones around.
Yeah.
Which is pretty common. I mean, it's certainly more common nowadays to have, a lot more open Indigenous community members and, Métis people. There's a lot of Métis people in Calgary and stuff like that. So, no, it definitely came up, especially, I think it's in grade 3 when they really do that part of the curriculum. So, yeah, I was able to bring in my dad's buckskin outfits and lots of beadwork. My mom grew up in Cardston, where borders the blood reserve, so she had she's Caucasian, she's a little blonde hair, blue eyed white lady who really went out of her way to make sure we learned stuff. And so all the stuff she taught us was like leather work, bead work. I learned pretty much how to bead from my mom. And so she would come in and show traditional regalia and stuff too. I made sure that I remembered it because I didn't know my dad, right? So that part was really important. And then as I got older and my mom got older, she stopped doing that. So it was more of an opportunity for me to start doing things like that and bring in regalia and beadwork and whatever stuff I had. And so, yeah, I mean, for sure, my whole life, people knew that I was mixed Indigenous, that I was local from an area. And I really didn't fully get into it until I was partly in college. Junior high and high school, there were definitely Native groups. And there are other community members within my school where we would be able to sort of meet together and learn from an elder and stuff like that. But, that wasn't super in depth. It was just sort of a way to know that I wasn't the only one in my classes. And then it wasn't really until late in college that I brought any of that into my work. It was mostly, things I knew, which were tactile stuff, beadwork and leather work and stuff, things that I knew, and like combining styles. So I had like a punk rock leather jacket from the 80s that I got in high school that I beaded onto as well. So there's lots of like mixture of stuff there, and that's really where the only time I ever included that into my work. But it wasn't really until after college I had a couple of opportunities that came up. I had a collaborative project that was at the Banff Center, so I had a little residency out there for a few weeks of a performance, and I was able to use instruments that I made, and one of them was really influenced by Indigenous traditional methods of making, and that I sort of mixed with a couple of other instrument ideas like a mandolin, a banjo, violin. So I mixed a couple of different instrument ideas with it. So I was able to use those and recordings and stuff for this project. It was called In Memoriam. All the artists and performers were Indigenous from across North America. And then I worked for the Calgary Public Library for 3 years. I was the Indigenous placemaking coordinator, which means I mostly curated the permanent Indigenous artwork for the library system. So any sort of murals or sculptures and stuff, I was, for the first 3 years, pretty key in getting those there, especially in the new Central Library downtown. I was able to go in the library before anyone in the public was able to, so I saw a nice, pristine, perfect, crystal clear building. It was really beautiful. And so all the permanent Indigenous artwork in there, I was able to curate and co-curate. And then from there, I had access to elders, people that knew my family and met me when I was a kid, but I didn't remember, and distant family members that, if you're from here as a Blackfoot person, it's pretty quick that you find out you're related to loads of people. It's not like someone whose family is from England or Scotland or something that emigrated over here, where most of their family roots are still over there and there's still extended cousins over there. Here, this is where all of my extended family is, and so I was able to broaden my my family, essentially, in my community, and knowing elders from the community. Was able to sit there as part of my job just to listen and to hear their stories and communicate those stories with people at the library. I did a lot of research about the Fiddler map, which is the first European map of Blackfoot territory in Western Canada, which was connected to the Blackfoot. That's really where Peter Fiddler got the map, and so I was able to research that, get that map put into the library, and researched all sorts of stuff. And so I came up with an idea to bridge the gap between contemporary work and traditional methods of making, because for Blackfoot people and other Indigenous people, the evidence of us being on this land for 10 to 40,000 years isn't as readily noticeable as it may be in Europe, where you drive down a road and you might see a big castle, oh look, somebody lived here in this big castle. But here it's a lot more intimate. But there's pictographs and petroglyphs and medicine wheels and other markers and stuff all over the place. But they're things that you have to figure out what to look for to find them.
Well, and the book that came out last fall by yourself is a great help in that process. And in fact, that's how I met you. You were doing a presentation at the Highwood Museum in High River regarding your book, The Art of Making, Rediscovering the Blackfoot Legacy. And something that I was struck by during your talk is how you had a very different view, someone who's informed about the history and about these landmarks and the art that you can still find and the rock placements and all of these different things. You have a different view of the landscape and of the land that we have here. And it's a much richer view. Like someone like myself who grew up in Alberta, we have landmarks drive down Deerfoot Trail and there's this building and there's this, and that's how we orient ourselves. But you can orient yourself in a much richer way, in a much more layered way that's connected to the past. Can you talk a bit about that? Before the Europeans came here, what were the significant landmarks? Where were the people typically mostly located? And what were the significant trails that were here before the Europeans came?
Well, when I started my research, I quickly found out that the most significant settlement places where cities and towns were set up by settlers were all important places traditionally, were mostly there because we had already established a network of trails and highways and semi-permanent places, and that all the forts that are in Canada and in Alberta were established on our trade sites. That's why the forts were built there, because they were already the trade centers. And Calgary is a good example of that, the confluence of the Bow and Elbow River, and I found out all the names of all these places were essentially Blackfoot names that were anglicized. And Calgary Mohkinsis means elbow, which is talking about not be one of our creator figures. He represents the Blackfoot people, and everywhere that was significant that he went was named after a body part of his. And so the elbow is one of them. Nose Hill's one of them. You go up to the Hand Hills, they're east of Calgary, as well as Chin Hill, there's Knee Hill, there's all sorts of different places that have body part names, and they're named for Blackfoot people, and people don't know that. And so, and the Bow River, it literally gets its name because we made bows and arrows and atlatls, tools from the good choke cherry trees and willow that grow around the Bow and the Little Bow River, and that's where the Bow gets its name. And so I found out really quickly that Highway 1, Highway 2, Highway 3, all these places were existing highways that we had for tens of thousands of years, and then were just paved when settlers came. And that was pretty much, some spots were straightened out and, maybe the hill was brought down a bit, but for the most part, the trails haven't changed. And so it was really easy for settlers to find their way to good settlement spots because they were already here, right? And then I was able what to look for when you're looking for paint spots. There are lots of patterns and telltale signs to look for, in all the river passes into the mountains, there's going to be one. So there's a couple that I've been looking for, especially on like the Red Deer River. I haven't been able to go in there yet and see, but there will be one there somewhere. Around here, Sheep River, there's one in there, as well as the Highwood Pass and the Crow's Nest Pass, the Banff Corridor. All those have traditional paintings, and anywhere where there's a hot springs, really important spot, it traditionally would have been worth more than gold. And how to eyeball a buffalo jump from far away, really good at that.
Right.
Rediscovered spots that people have forgotten about, even within Calgary, and that there are traditional paintings in Calgary, and being someone who was one of the only people that knew about that or like rediscovered that was really exciting, and also really excited to communicate that with elders who may have heard of these places through traditional stories but didn't know exactly where they were. It was also cool because it confirmed that what I found was legitimate.
Yes.
And also that I could take community members to these places and be like, this is the spot you're talking about, which was also really exciting. So it was a really good way for me to connect in a way that I understood, which was land-based, and like my research started with why are these markers here in these spots, and what sort of materials did we use in these places, and why would we harvest from this spot, and what made this river significant or this mountain range. And they all had answers. They all had really legitimate answers. And lots of times when people think about Indigenous cultures that were very spiritual, the land is spiritual, and that we're stewards of the land, caretakers of the land. And yes, all very spiritual, goes into our religion, but really it's practical first, because of what naturally grows there, or what natural sort of beauty is there. Natural landmarks are things that we would be able to pick up from far away, like, oh, that's this name here, or that's this name here, and I know that if we go to this place, Cypress Hills, there's going to be big enough trees within this big flat grassland around us that there will be water there will be trees there for us to build our lodges and teepees and stuff. And so using it sort of a tactile way, as I understood as an artist, connected me to sort of more spiritual stuff and like traditional names, and it made a crystal clear sense to me when I started marrying the things that I understood as methods of making and tool making and artwork, and where to find resources directly connected to the spiritual stuff, the creation stories, being in a place where part of our Genesis story, and being like, hey, this is the spot they're talking about. You can see exactly where the spot they're describing in this story. They're not just like myths and legends of nameless places that didn't exist that we just made up to make up the story, but we're literal places where literal event happened, and we literally used it, and then the story was built from there.
Right, and it's so interesting to me how your process of researching this book, The Art of Making, involved you going out. You're not researching some dusty archives in some museum or library. You're going out often with your dog, or always with your dog.
Yeah.
And you're physically going to these places and finding the paintings on the rocks, which aren't always easy to find, right?
Yeah.
And you're finding rock formations on the ground, and you say that dog parks are. I remember you saying that dog parks are often a rich source of discovery for you.
It's because dog parks, for the most part, especially around like rivers and creeks, the municipalities and city don't do much to it, right? They just set up a fence around it, so you just let your dog go run free. And so they didn't till it, they didn't plow it, they didn't move any stuff around like they did for roads and for houses and stuff like that. So there are lots of stuff, especially like in Edworthy Park, that big beautiful dog park that overlooks the river valley. There's existing teepee rings. Bow Trail is one of our old trails. It links up with Old Banff Coach Road, which was a road before there were coaches, and all sorts of stuff like that. And you start to see the network of where things lead up, and you can sort of eyeball what original trails were turned into roads based on how they're shaped, and how hard they are to walk up a hill. We're like, why is this road so much harder to walk up than that one that you could see down the neighborhood? It's because this one's the old one, right? Lots of old coulees, Nose Hill, all these spots you'll find places with evidence that we used it for tens of thousands of years. And so, I mean, if you want to stumble upon something, dog park's the perfect place to be. Even if you don't have a dog, going in there and looking for high hills or low places where you could set up, if you thought you could set up a tent there and be like, hey, this is a really good camp spot, then it's probably one of those spots, right? And so, yeah, there's loads of spots within Calgary that lots of people don't know, and lots of community members didn't know after I talked to archaeologists and local archaeologists and looked at stories that describe places like, hey, this sounds like this place here. And, the names of trails like Blackfoot Trail, Deerfoot Trail are all named after. They're called trail because it was the original trail that was there, right? And so finding those things and then finding out what we find are important. Okotoks is named after the Big Erratic, which is on the sort of west side of town here. It's a paint gallery, right? There's at least 11 different spots with paintings on it that people don't really know about unless you know what to look for. And it has creation stories, and you sort of understand its path and other glacial erratics on its path back, and how the relationship between different settlements and different towns were. And then you start finding out which specific clans in the community use specific places. I know the Blackfoot clan that used the Fort Calgary location. They're the Eagle Rib clan. They're the ones that are related to the guy who's named Deerfoot. He's part of that clan. That's part of the reason why he lived in this area. Right? And then you start to piece all those things together, and then they all start making more sense. Where when I grew up, people made it seem like we just wandered aimlessly following buffalo, and that we were a little more than wild animals, essentially, is that we just followed game and things like that we didn't cultivate land, that we didn't have any agriculture, that we didn't do that. We're named Blackfoot because we cleared the plains when a place needed to be reinvigorated with growth. You clear by fire, and then you walk through and make sure all the seeds are out there too. So that is agriculture. It's just not an acre square that you plow for your crops, and we utilize stuff that grew here naturally that we didn't have to fight to make grow, and all those things like that. So finding out that everything that we did made sense, made everything else make sense. It made every cultural teaching make more sense. Made our relationship to the land make more sense, because for 10,000 years we didn't need to adjust our system very much. It wasn't until the first colonies started on the East Coast that we needed to understand a different point of view. We had our point of view, and so we didn't need to build lots of big permanent structures because our system worked without doing it. We didn't have to trade great distances for certain materials. Obviously we did for lots of stuff, but we didn't need to. Our system was self-perpetuating, and all we needed to do was just have an inter-organization of which clan and which nation stewarded which part, and our seasonal around, how we would move between those places in a year, all makes sense. It makes perfect sense, and that's as I did more of my research, because that book is actually only year one of my research.
Yes.
Year 2, 3, and 4, I got way better at it. This is baby steps, and really what I found out. And book 2 is going to be coming out at the end of this year, pretty much the same time as it was last year, which will be a little bit more in depth. This is the first book is really crash course in Blackfoot history and traditional ways of knowing and methods of making, and so book 2 will be a little bit more of that, a little bit more in depth. That there was a contemporary artwork as well as the written research to go with the project. So every year I had a contemporary work that was sort of the theme for the year. So the first one was to make musical instruments, or original musical instruments based on traditional methods of making. So bone and hide and wood and carving and things like that were key to that. And then the second year was music based. So I wrote a whole album. I went to different places in the territory, wrote about my experiences and what sort of creation stories were tied to a specific place. And I broadened where I went. I mean, the first book was really sort of 2 hours of from Calgary, the most, a couple other spots, but like really Calgary based. And then book 2 went to Saskatchewan, and then I started to link up to neighboring communities like the Kootenay, and they're just on the other side of the mountains from us. And so, what was our relation to them and things like that. So it broadens that a little bit. I find stuff in book 2 is probably more interesting to me now because it's a little bit deeper and it made a little bit more sense to me. But yeah, it's true. I mean, I can go out into the land and drive past certain places, be like, I think there might be something over there. It's because I know in the back of my head what to look for, and then for the most part, I'm right. There's only been a few places where I've had to like really, really check with somebody and be like, am I way off here? And for the most part, I've been correct, especially when finding buffalo jumps. I mean, not every outcropping or rock is a buffalo jump,
right?
But if you see the telltale signs, and then you're like, hey, this spot, especially 150, 200 years ago, this would have been a higher cliff, all these things like that. And then, following waterways, and I typically hike through water fairly often, stumble upon stuff all the time. Or I'm looking for something and then I find something else. Right. Which is really exciting sometimes.
But what's cool is that you're not just discovering these things for yourself, but you're acting as a tour guide through your books and your talks. You're able to be a tour guide for people, give them a richer view of what we have now, but also how it's connected to the past and how it's changed. So I really see you as like a very, valuable and informative tour guide that can make people appreciate that there's much more to what they see here in southern Alberta than what's on the surface. And it's a nice feeling to know to feel that connection to the past. Even if you're not Aboriginal yourself, it's nice to feel a connection to the past and to the members of the community who are still here, which I remember when you and I were in Okotoks a couple of months ago, and there's a woman who shared a story with us where she had a lady friend visiting from the UK who was very well educated, and she was surprised how much of an Aboriginal presence there still is, because she thought that basically they'd been wiped out, that basically that was history, not anything to do with the present. And that's kind of sad. I mean, it's sad to me. It must be even more to you that some people could have that view that, Aboriginals are just about the past.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and that's really on purpose, actually, by the governments of both Canada and the United States, is that if we are something that's no longer around, that our point of view doesn't matter, right? And that they can do and say whatever they want, and the agreements that we made with them no longer are valid, where that's not true. And you can even see it in signage. It's actually one of my pet peeves is if you go to Banff or Jasper or even Bow Valley Provincial Park, and you go to these places where I know that there are paintings there, like Grassy Lakes is a really good example, which is just on the edge of Canmore. You hike up this trail, and the signage at the trail talks about this guy named Grassy, who was just one of the local
Lawrence Grassy.
Yeah. And he made the trail, and he discovered these lakes at the top of the mountain, and that he was so great. Everything, we owe so much to his memory. Where if you go about 50 feet above those lakes, there's a bunch of pictographs, super old pictographs, and a painted cave in there. And that proves that not only was he not the first person there, that he didn't blaze the trail existed, and then he just sort of stumbled upon it and then followed it, and then found all these things. And those pictographs aren't mentioned at all in the signage, and so it's this erasure of history, right? And then other places where it says ancient Native people, ancient Aboriginals, ancient Indigenous people use this as a buffalo jump or use this as this. We use buffalo jumps after Confederation. We used buffalo jumps until the 1880s. That's after the founding of Canada. That's not ancient. That's very recent.
Yes.
So that's the wording of there is problematic. And there's lots of problematic wording there, and that's to make sure that newcomers don't feel guilty that we aren't allowed to go see our places anymore, that we essentially don't exist to them anymore. And then the governments tell that to other people outside of the country, and then becomes a misconception of that we are no longer existent, where there isn't any time that we didn't exist.
Right.
We existed up until present day. So and we didn't lose our practices or our language, even though it was certainly one of the goals of residential school and the Indian Act and stuff was to erase us, but it never fully did. And so they can't say it's ancient history. We never left.
Right. And so, like you say, you're like a countervailing force against this erasure. You're painting the picture back in through your books, The Art of Making, Rediscovering the Blackfoot Legacy, which came out last fall. And then next fall, near the end of the year, you'll have your next book, which focuses on traditional instruments. And that's just the second book in a series that you're working on.
Yeah, that's right.
A lot of work ahead of you. We've just scratched the surface on this topic, of course. So I encourage people to check out your books to go deeper into these topics. And thank you, Jared, for joining me here at the Sweetgrass Deli Meadery here in Okotoks, not halfway, but partly between Calgary and High River, where you live. Thanks so much for your time. It's been great talking with you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Dan.